I am Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, how can architects change the world for the better? Have a think about this. Not only are they responsible for the design and structure of built surroundings, but they also have an incredible impact on communities, the environment, and even on culture. They literally shape our world. You can see that back here with some of the world's most iconic buildings. Now, we asked you, our stream community, to share some images of how architecture has impacted your world. Anna Berankova shares these photographs, and she says that this office building is in the centre of Prague and it was designed by my friend's father. Huge positive is a combination of nature with the urban features. We need more buildings like this, ideally as eco and sustainable as possible. Sean Lodging shares images from Rock Island. Thank you, Sean. He's in Illinois, and he says these two community projects are part of efforts to improve rundown and neglected park and property while depicting heritage. One more from HG Flores, sharing this building in Camden in London, and it shows us how environmentally sustainable design can also be aesthetically pleasing. Absolutely. Now, on today's programme, you'll meet some very influential architects who work at the intersection of building design and social justice. And here are the thoughts of one architect who does exactly that, Donna Sink.
I am most excited about in architecture right now is that we're finally getting rid of the idea of the architect as solitary genius. Architecture and other design disciplines are getting sort of fuzzy and interwoven as we start to see how connected the ideas of social justice are to our built environment. Architecture, planning, transit, urban land use policy, even economic mobility and public health. These things are all connected in creating a fair and equitable society, and the built environment has enormous influence on all of those issues. We're finally starting to see the architecture discipline embrace the idea that the hero's journey may not be about Starchitecture, but maybe about doing quiet community collaborative service in your world.
Joining us from Lagos, Nigeria, Kunle Adeyemi is an architect, designer and urban researcher. He's also the founder and principal of NLE. In Niamey, Niger, Mariam Kamara is an architect. She's also founder and principal of Atelier Masomi. She's also founding member of United for Design. That's a global collective working on projects in the US, Afghanistan and Niger. And Yasmin Lari is an architect. She's also co-founder and CEO of the Heritage Foundation of Pakistan. She's also Pakistan's first woman architect. It is so good to have you all here, everybody. Our audience has got a very specific idea of what an architect should do. For instance, Al Mubarak says architectural design should be geared to accommodate modern-day disaster management equipment, fostering peaceful coexistence and meeting the needs of all. Viju James, in areas where there are heavy rains for many months, houses should be designed to keep the rain out without having to put up plastic sheets to protect the home. So the public is thinking about this in a very practical way. Yasmin, from your perspective, what is the role of an architect?
Well, you see, I really believe in kind of proper barefoot architecture. It's very different from what we see normally. And I sometimes call it also non-architecture. But it is something that, I believe that architects need to use their expertise to perhaps, lift people out of poverty. This is what I try to do. And that means that we have to democratize architecture, and also that, we need to provide social and also ecological justice, as well as I think the comments that we just saw about climate change impact and how do we deal with disasters. So these are all issues that are very relevant to us today.
What does democratize architecture actually mean in reality?
Well, it means that you have to design so that it relates to the poor, the majority that lives in many of Asian and African countries, and that we make sure that these are low cost, that are zero carbon and zero waste, because we have to think of the planet and to make sure that we don't deplete the resources of the planet. So that is what it means, that it will be for everybody. It has to be pro-poor. It has to deal with, majority of the people that live in very impoverished conditions.
Mariam, I want to show our audience one of the designs that you've done in Niger, and it's really striking. What was it that made you want to be an architect?
Well, I actually wanted to be an architect a long time before I actually became one. This is a second career for me. I used to be a software developer for many years, but I just could not shake this desire, to do architecture. And the thing that actually allowed me to make that plunge was this realization, and I think this is what everybody on here can relate to, that is really this realization that with architecture, you can have such a powerful impact in people's environments, in their circumstances, in their economics, as was just said. There is that ecological responsibility that comes with it, all the materials. There's an issue of identity, of culture, all of these things. And those are all issues that I was seeing as being really salient and important, and just were guiding everything in the environment I grew up in, coming from such a poor country. And so all of a sudden, I just realized that, more than just the design to create, which was my initial reason for doing architecture, I could actually make a small contribution towards working on a lot of the issues I was seeing in my home country. So that really encouraged me to just take the plunge.
Kunle Floating School Adeyemi. People, whenever you talk to people, they always ask you about the floating school of Makoto. Is that your hit building, do you think? Is that the one that will always be identified with you wherever you go?
Well, I think it's definitely one that people recognize. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of other projects, and it certainly is one that has had quite a lot of impact and perhaps public interest. And I guess for that reason, it's very, very identifiable with, I guess, most of my work.
Good thing or bad thing for you?
Oh, it's a good thing. It's always a good thing.
Is it like being asked to be played your favourite song over and over and over again, and that song's from 20 years ago, but you still have to play it because that's your hit?
Well, if people want it, if people like it, and I think we always we're constantly making improvements on this idea, and we're happy to share it.
So, Guess, I want you to be honest about this. Architects do have a reputation for being somewhat aloof. Where do you think that might come from?
I beg your pardon? Say that
Architects have a reputation for being somewhat aloof. Where do you think that might come from?
I mean, I think that's probably because architecture is such a profession that we tend to focus within ourselves and within a small community of thinkers. And sometimes we're in the sort of dream world of what we think is ideal. And I think these days the issues that actually determine developments in the world are much more complex, and they're requiring architects to really think more outside the domain of architecture itself. And work with other collaborators to address challenges that are beyond just design.
Sure. I want to tell our audience about an architect called Michael Arad. Michael Arad, you may know, is the designer of the memorial for the 9/11 victims. He's here on my laptop. Here you can see the memorial in the background. More recently, he designed this, which is a memorial for another tragic event, which was the Emanuel 9 Memorial to commemorate the Charleston church shootings. You may remember a gunman went into the church and killed people in the church. So Michael spoke to us a little bit earlier and told us what he felt was the role, the responsibility of an architect. Have a listen to him here.
I believe architecture has a very important role to play in affecting social change. Our public places are a reflection of who we are as a society. We make them, and they in turn make us. And these public places bring us together as a community, as a group, and I think that is one of the most important things they can do. They can affirm our sense of identity as part of a collective and drive the dialogue in a direction that suggests, we are more than the sum of our individual beings.
Yasmin, what I find fascinating about your career is that you changed at some point from designing grand buildings to designing very practical buildings. What happened to you? Why did you decide that you needed to make an impact on the people and the housing and the way people lived in Pakistan?
Well, see, basically, of course, Pakistan is really a poor country, and we have an enormous sort of high poverty levels. And now I work with people who walk barefoot; they have no shoes. So we're designing something which I call barefoot social architecture, which is to see that we can change the mindset, transform their mindsets. It's like social engineering, but with a dimension of culture in it. Because what we do is to try to see what has been the vernacular tradition and to try to incorporate that in everything that we do. It has to be something that has to be a participatory process where people themselves are able to build themselves and we help them to build better. Because the problem in my country and many countries of Asia and Africa is that people suffer from enormous deficits of basic needs. I mean, they have no shelter, they may not have any toilets, there's no water, there is no cooking facility. So all these are basic needs, and also plantation. So what we are trying to do is to really implement now these holistic models where people themselves begin to take pride in what they do and they understand their own self-worth. And that is the challenge.
And Yasmin, what we were showing just then was an elevated building because there's, people will know, so much flooding in Pakistan during the monsoon season. So the building is elevated. It's so simple so that when the rains come, people don't have to leave their homes. They're not displaced people in their own land. And then there's all of the living can happen above the floodwater. And then that means that changes their lives. So that's social impact right there.
Yeah, and they don't get displaced because that's the worst thing that happens. When any flooding takes place or earthquakes happen, then, obviously you are displaced. And this is what we have to now guard against. We have to really have disaster preparedness everywhere so that everything that is built is safe. So I have to tell you that I only use bamboo, mud, and lime. I don't know whether you know that or not. I do not use any cement. There is no material that we use which might have high carbon emissions. So that is something that's now very important for the future, I think. And it is something that people are used to. They can work with those materials themselves, and so they can actually rise above adversity by themselves. And that is what we need to do, is to give them the tools where they become self-reliant. And this is what the attempt is actually in all the work that I do today.
Mariam, there is this debate going on within the architecture profession, which is about purpose and then also about beauty and art. Where do you stand in that debate? Tell us about the work that you're doing that straddles that, perhaps.
Well, I don't really see them as necessarily, two separate things or two things that cannot coexist. I think as architects, one of the functions of design is, beauty. It is a component, and I think there's often this opposition that is brought between, building for good or making something that is for maybe the least people who have the least means, and building something beautiful as though you could not do both at the same time.
All right, Mariam, let's give people an example. I want them to see the market that you design. So we're going to show the market, and then you can tell us, what are they seeing? Go ahead.
Essentially, we made this market in a rural village in Niger, and it used to be a weekly market that was just made out of reed and straw, and basically that they had to rebuild roughly every 6 months. And essentially, the village was very interested in developing a local economy. This used to be a weekly market, so they could only really be itinerant, selling their goods every week. And so the idea was to create this place that would be, whimsical and beautiful and provide all these playful little canopies where children could play around and really feel as though it was this really massive playground. And parents and, sellers and whoever customers could just sit about and just want to hang out, not just about commerce, not just about anything else, in order to really give kind of the sense of both pride, sense of place that you want to be in, sense of beauty, because no matter what your income is, no matter what your circumstances is, I don't see why we should say that just because something is supposed to be for a village or, some other least rich area, that it should not have beauty. So we really try in all of our projects to find ways in which to inject something that can make you dream, something that's playful, something that maybe you've never seen before, and that can transport you outside of yourself. And maybe even sometimes outside of your condition. Psychologically, these things matter, I really believe.
Kunle, let me put this tweet to you. It's from Werimo Victor. He says, architects should allow members of the community to have a voice in the design. Design shouldn't be technocratic. As economist Bill Easterly describes in Tyranny of Experts, treat our community designs as policies that each one is affected differently. I have seen you work with the local community. It is a fascinating process. How do you do it? How do you say, this is my design, I'm the architect, but also I'm doing it for you?
Well, I actually don't start out that way. I think we typically go into a community or go into a condition where there's a need for our service, and have conversations with people, talk to them, understand the problems, understand their challenges, but also, more importantly, the opportunities that they have. It doesn't matter how difficult a condition is, there are always opportunities and assets. And that's what we typically look out for.
So tell us about the Black Rhino Academy, because we've got some pictures of that, and then you can tell me how you came through that process. Yeah,
so the Black Rhino Academy is a project in a very remote village in Karatu, Tanzania. And we worked with the local partners there, the founders, to understand what kind of materials they have, the resources and the building typologies. And earth bricks were very commonly used. And we worked with the community builders there to develop a way of creating spaces and architecture that was simple, but was also had character, something that solved the problems, and also just created an identity for the school itself.
Yasmin, is there anything that you wanted to ask Mariam or Kunle about the work that they're doing? Because you're a pioneer. You've been doing this when they were still at school.
That's right. Well, I think what would be really interesting, because I agree with both what they said in terms of good design, because I think that's needed in people who are very poor. They will appreciate good design. And where there's deficit, you need more design rather than less. So really it's the poor who need the services of good architects. But I would say that I'd be really interested to see if, for instance, Kunle could really design something in bamboo, his floating school, if that could be in bamboo rather than wood. Or Mariam could design her walls in, rather than burnt brick, if that could be mud brick. And we could pass on the information about how to use lime, because lime is an amazing material. It makes it absolutely waterproof. And that's what I do in all our mud buildings. We actually mix lime and it stabilizes the soil. And it makes really very strong bricks. So I would really like to see good architects getting involved in humanitarian work, because that's where they're really needed urgently. Because I might just explain to you that there's a whole Barefoot ecosystem, I believe, where people are, there's a market there, which is like for a barefoot market where transactions can take place. And if we can train these poor people how to be able to help to build better, that is the best thing that we can do. So if I may just give you an example of our Pakistan chula, I don't know whether you have an image of that or not, which is a stove. It's an earthen stove on a platform, so it's DRR compliant. Flood waters don't affect it. And yeah, there they are. And I designed it as an earthen platform with this particular kind of two-stove arrangement. And I gave them that. But I feel that my work is like creating a canvas on which they then begin to innovate, and they produce something that's absolutely extraordinary. So out of these 40,000 chulas, and we just heard that we got this World Habitat Award for Pakistan chula for the earthen stoves. Each one is a unique product. It's a work of art. So that's what people do themselves then, if you allow them the possibility of participating in the process.
Mariam, our audience is very concerned about the sustainability of architecture and new buildings. And Jamal says that the world needs more sustainable architecture. It's our responsibility to build green and clean, smart cities. And then Peter here talks about architecture on the positive side as being critical in recycling waste. An example of construction of buildings using recycled material in Los Angeles. You're also doing something very similar in Niger. Tell us your take on marble, for instance. Where should marble be used and where should marble not be used? I think it might just wake people up just a little bit. Mariam?
Oh, sorry. Well, I mean, I think really when it comes to materials, you use what you have. right?
Yeah.
And so the climate and the geology of the place you're in usually would determine that. If there's no marble in Niger and I have to import it from Italy, we have a bit of a problem, right? Especially because we're a landlocked country, we're far away from Italy. It will be unbelievably prohibitive, and that's the least sustainable thing we can possibly do. If you're in a village in Italy that quarries marble, then by all means, include the marble. So it's not a problem, And so in Niger, for example, we have laterite, which is the soil. That's amazing. And so we make our projects making these earth bricks and that are unfired, and we just use a press to make them stronger. And so the raw material that we use helps that in that direction. But then also even the metal that we use is actually recycled metal. We have in Niger has this great ability and a bunch of people who have really, really high skills in transforming metal, scrap metal that they melt down and turn back into tubes and sheet metal, which is not structural, but it's wonderful for doing, for example, the canopies that we made in the project that you just showed. And so we end up recycling these things over and over again and turn them into something else, and then harnessing the local skills. So these are not necessarily the skills of the people who live there, but those are skills of then other workers that can transcend what they're used to doing, which is also something that's incredibly important in terms of really furthering the skills that are already there and putting forth challenges and providing new designs and new ways of putting together the things that they already know how to do, which ends up for us creating a situation where at the end of a project, we always have the construction workers or the metal workers who always comment about the fact that, oh my gosh, I've never done something like this before. And when you drew it, I thought it was absolutely crazy, but okay, I'm happy we did this. And for us, that's the absolutely most gratifying thing that we can possibly have in our work process.
Kunle, I'm thinking about the future generations of architects that I know that you're already inspiring. If you could tell them one tip for how to do architecture that actually changes people's life, what would it be?
Well, I think my experience with architecture shows that it's one that really requires time, attention, requires a lot of focus on the art itself and perfection of the trade. And for that reason, I like to say architecture is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
I want to show a little clip from a film that Yasmin helped us make at Jazeera some years ago. It's called Rebel Architects, and you're teaching a class. I don't think there's a woman in the class apart from yourself, but you have a mission in mind, and I want to share this clip with everybody. This is from Rebel Architects, and this is Yasmin just a few years ago teaching about architecture. Have a look.
वो इस लिहाज से बहुत अच्छा है क्योंकि आपको किसी और पर रिलाई करने की जरूरत ही नहीं है। इसलिए हमें हमेशा सोचना है कि कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्या है, हम कहाँ के लिए काम कर रहे हैं, किन जगह के लिए कर रहे हैं, किन लोगों के लिए कर रहे हैं, मौसम का क्या है, मटेरियल्स क्या है, और फिर आप चीजों को समझ के आगे चल सकते हैं। There can be much to discuss and we can, see how to move forward and hopefully we brainwash all these young people and that be one good start. क्या ख्याल है?
Yasmin, briefly at the very end of our show, how is the brainwashing going in Pakistan?
I think it's going well. I think we'll be getting more and more involved and taking up more and more villages. We are planning to take up these 40,000 Chula villages now, where there'll be the rights-based model being applied. But I have to say that I really would like now to, that we should revisit the Western charity model. So basically, I don't believe in handouts. I believe that people can do things themselves. We have to invest into their training. And I really would like, and I need massive amount of help actually from tech giants, because I need communication. So people like Google or I don't know, Microsoft or WhatsApp.
Mariam and Kunle and Yasmin, this is the end of our conversation. Yasmin, I'm impressed that you're using this opportunity as a platform for getting more people involved with your style of architecture. I appreciate that. Tayob says here, architects are able to make the world a better place by responding to climate, responding to users, and then making it special. Kunle and Yasmin and Mariam, thank you for making this episode of The Stream special. I will be online always at AJ Stream. Take care. See you next time.